They surrounded the quiet woman for a joke, laughing as if they had already decided who she was, but less than 10 minutes later, the entire dojo would stand in absolute silence, realizing they had just humiliated the wrong person. Before we continue, take a second to subscribe, like this video, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from tonight. Stories like these remind people that respect matters, and every share helps this channel grow. The evening rain tapped softly against the tall glass windows of Lawson Martial Arts Academy, while fluorescent lights reflected across the polished wooden floors inside the dojo. The air carried the familiar scent of sweat, leather gloves, and disinfectant as students stretched across the blue training mats under the watchful eyes of senior black belts. At exactly 7:12 p.m., the front door opened quietly, and Claire Bennett stepped inside. No one noticed her at first. At 41 years old, Claire looked nothing like the athletes lining the walls of the dojo. Her brown hair was tied back in a low ponytail, and she wore a faded gray hoodie over simple black workout pants with white running shoes that looked years old. She carried no expensive gear bag, no custom uniform, no trophies, just a small backpack slung over one shoulder. She paused near the entrance for a moment, calmly observing the room while rainwater dripped from her sleeves onto the rubber mat near the door. Around her, conversations slowly faded. Several students glanced toward her, then immediately looked at one another with amused expressions. One younger black belt smirked under his breath. Another whispered something that caused two students near the punching bags to laugh quietly. Claire seemed not to notice, or perhaps she simply chose not to react. Near the center of the dojo stood Derek Lawson, the academy's head instructor, a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s with sharp blue eyes and a black belt embroidered with gold lettering. He was known throughout the county tournament circuit for his discipline, intensity, and complete intolerance for weakness. The moment he saw Claire standing near the entrance, his expression hardened with immediate judgment. He walked toward her slowly, the sound of his bare feet pressing against the mat echoing faintly through the room. "Can I help you?" he asked flatly. Claire offered a polite smile. "I called earlier about trying a beginner session." Derek's eyes moved over her worn clothes before he glanced briefly at the students now openly watching. "Beginner session?" he repeated, his tone carrying the faint edge of amusement. Claire nodded once. "Just looking for a place to train." A few students chuckled quietly nearby. One whispered she picked the wrong dojo. Derek crossed his arms. "This isn't a cardio kickboxing studio," he said. "People here train seriously." Claire remained calm. "That's exactly why I came." Something about the way she answered caused a strange pause to settle over the room. Not fear, not nervousness, just quiet certainty. Emily Carter, a 19-year-old student tightening her gloves near the wall, noticed it immediately. Most people shrank when Derek Lawson challenged them publicly. Claire Bennett didn't. She simply stood there beneath the bright overhead lights while rain rolled down the windows behind her, her eyes steady, her breathing calm, as if the tension filling the dojo belonged to everyone else except her. The silence inside the dojo lasted only a few seconds before the whispers started again. Derek Lawson turned away from Claire with the faint smirk of someone already certain how the night would end. Around the room, students resumed stretching and practicing combinations, but the occasional glance toward the quiet woman near the entrance never stopped. Claire removed her hoodie carefully and folded it over the bench beside the wall. Underneath, she wore a plain navy athletic shirt with no logos, no academy branding, nothing that suggested rank or experience. Derek tossed a white practice belt toward her without looking directly at her. "Wear that if you are stepping onto my mat," he said. The belt landed softly against her hands. Several students exchanged amused looks. In most martial arts schools, beginners earned white belts after introductory classes, but Derek had thrown it to her deliberately, a quiet public reminder that he considered her completely inexperienced. Claire simply nodded once and tied the belt neatly around her waist. Emily Carter watched closely from across the room. Something about the way Claire tied the knot bothered her. It was too precise, too practiced. Not the awkward fumbling movement of a newcomer. Emily had spent 6 years training at the academy, and she had seen hundreds of first-day students. None of them moved like that. Derek clapped his hands sharply. Circle up. The students gathered across the mat, beneath the bright fluorescent lights, while rain continued streaking down the windows outside. Thunder rolled faintly somewhere over the city. Derek paced slowly in front of the class, hands folded behind his back like a drill instructor inspecting recruits. "Tonight," he announced, "we are focusing on pressure control and situational awareness." His eyes shifted briefly toward Claire. "Some people think martial arts is about confidence. It is not. It is about surviving discomfort." Tyler Reed grinned immediately, already sensing where the evening was heading. Tall, athletic, and eager to impress Derek at every opportunity, Tyler enjoyed humiliating weaker students almost as much as Derek enjoyed creating the pressure. "Maybe our guest can help demonstrate," Tyler said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Several students laughed. Claire remained quiet near the edge of the mat, stretching her shoulders calmly while avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. Derek stopped walking. For a moment, his expression carried the cold satisfaction of a man sensing entertainment. "Actually," he said slowly, "that is not a bad idea." Emily lowered her eyes uneasily. She had seen Derek do this before. New students became examples. Embarrassment was part of his teaching philosophy. Pressure revealed weakness, or so he claimed. But tonight felt different somehow. Derek motioned toward the center of the mat. Claire, front and center. Every conversation stopped immediately. Claire stood and walked forward without hesitation. The soft sound of her sneakers against the mat echoed faintly through the room. Tyler stepped beside Derek with folded arms and an eager smile already spreading across his face. "We are just going to test your composure," Derek explained, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Nothing complicated." Claire looked at him steadily. "All right." Derek gestured toward the surrounding students. "Form a circle." Black belts and senior students slowly closed around her beneath the harsh overhead lights. Some folded their arms. Others smirked openly. One student quietly pulled out his phone near the back wall. Claire stood alone at the center, while nearly 20 people watched her from every direction. Tyler circled slowly around her shoulder, grinning like a shark sensing weakness. "Nervous yet?" he asked. Claire did not answer immediately. Her eyes moved calmly across the room instead, studying exits, spacing, distances, posture. The tiny details most people never noticed. Emily felt a strange chill crawl up her arms. Claire was not reacting like someone trapped inside a humiliating situation. She was reacting like someone measuring it. Tyler Reed stopped circling and stepped directly into Claire Bennett's personal space with the smug confidence of a man performing for an audience. The students around the mat leaned forward slightly, sensing the tension tightening across the room like a pulled cable. Overhead lights reflected against the polished floor, while rain continued tapping softly against the windows behind them. Derek Lawson folded his arms near the edge of the circle, clearly enjoying the atmosphere unfolding in front of him. "Situational pressure," he announced to the class. "A person either stays calm or collapses when surrounded." Several black belts nodded as if they were witnessing an important lesson rather than a public humiliation. Claire stood motionless at the center of the circle, her breathing even, her eyes calm. Tyler smirked at her silence. "You freeze up easy?" he asked. "Or are you just shy?" A few students laughed quietly. Claire finally looked at him directly. "Neither." Her voice was soft, almost gentle, but something about the answer caused Tyler's smile to tighten slightly. Derek noticed it too. Men like Derek Lawson built their authority by controlling rooms, and control depended on reading weakness quickly. But Claire Bennett gave him nothing to work with. No nervous gestures, no defensive posture, no anxious laughter, just stillness, and stillness made arrogant people uncomfortable. Derek stepped forward slowly. "All right," he said. "Basic exercise." He pointed toward 3 senior students standing near the back wall. "You 3, join Tyler." The black belts immediately obeyed, stepping into the circle beside Tyler with eager expressions. One cracked his knuckles dramatically, while another rolled his shoulders like an amateur actor preparing for a scene. More students pulled out phones now, expecting entertainment. Emily Carter remained near the edge of the mat, arms folded tightly across her chest. The longer she watched Claire, the less this felt like a harmless initiation. Claire's eyes tracked each person entering the circle with quiet precision. She noticed foot placement, balance distribution, spacing between shoulders. The tiny unconscious habits experienced fighters recognized instantly. Emily swallowed uneasily. Beginners did not observe rooms like that. Derek gestured broadly toward the group surrounding Claire. "The goal is simple," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Controlled pressure, nothing aggressive." Tyler grinned. "We just want to see how she handles intensity." His tone carried no real kindness behind it. The students understood that immediately. This was about embarrassment now. One of the black belts stepped closer and lightly bumped Claire's shoulder while smirking at the crowd. Another moved behind her intentionally, crowding her space. A third leaned near enough to make the situation visibly uncomfortable, yet Claire never reacted emotionally. She simply adjusted her footing half an inch. Tiny, barely noticeable, but Emily saw it. Stable, balanced, intentional. Derek's expression narrowed slightly. "Interesting," he muttered under his breath. Tyler raised his voice again. "Still calm?" Claire looked at him steadily. "You are standing too close to each other." The room fell briefly silent. Tyler blinked. "What?" Claire's eyes moved across the group once more. "Your spacing is wrong." Several students laughed immediately, assuming she was bluffing. Tyler looked back toward Derek with amused disbelief. "She is critiquing us now?" Derek smirked coldly. "Apparently." But Emily noticed something different. Derek's smile no longer looked fully relaxed. Claire had spoken without hesitation, without defensiveness, and worst of all for Derek Lawson, without trying to impress anyone. She sounded like someone making a simple observation. One of the senior black belts stepped forward with growing irritation. "You think you know better?" he asked. Claire's expression never changed. "I think you are underestimating the situation." The dojo went quiet again, not loud silence, the dangerous kind. The kind where arrogance begins slowly turning into uncertainty. The atmosphere inside Lawson Martial Arts Academy shifted in a way nobody fully understood yet. The laughter that had filled the room moments earlier no longer sounded confident. It sounded forced. Tyler Reed glanced briefly toward Derek Lawson, expecting the instructor to shut the situation down with another joke. But Derek remained strangely quiet near the edge of the mat, studying Claire Bennett more carefully now. Rain hammered harder against the windows as thunder rolled low across the dark evening sky outside. The fluorescent lights above cast long reflections across the polished floor, while nearly every student in the dojo stood frozen around the circle, waiting to see what would happen next. Tyler forced another grin onto his face. "Underestimating the situation?" he repeated mockingly. "You are standing in the middle of 4 black belts." Claire tilted her head slightly. "Exactly." One of the senior students scoffed loudly. "This lady thinks she is teaching us tactics now." More nervous laughter followed, but Emily Carter noticed something important. Nobody stepped closer anymore. Claire had changed the energy without raising her voice once. Derek finally moved toward the center again, hands folded behind his back. "All right," he said calmly. "Enough talking." His eyes locked onto Claire. "You clearly think you understand pressure, so let us make this educational." Tyler's smile returned immediately. Derek pointed toward the surrounding black belts. "Controlled movement only," he instructed. "No contact. I want her to navigate space under pressure." The students nodded. On paper, the exercise sounded harmless, but everyone understood the real purpose. Claire was supposed to panic, freeze, embarrass herself in front of the room. Derek stepped aside with the cold confidence of a man expecting an inevitable collapse. Tyler began circling again, this time closer and faster. The other black belts moved with him, slowly tightening the space around Claire while students watched silently from the walls. One black belt suddenly stepped into her path from the left. Claire shifted smoothly without hesitation. Another moved behind her. She adjusted again before he fully closed distance. Calm, efficient, almost effortless. Tyler's smirk slowly faded. "You trained somewhere before?" he asked. Claire's eyes remained forward. "A long time ago." Derek narrowed his eyes immediately. "What style?" Claire paused briefly. "Several." Tyler laughed harshly. "That usually means none." But the confidence behind his voice had weakened. Claire continued moving through the tightening circle with strange precision. Every adjustment happened early, before pressure fully developed. It was subtle enough that inexperienced students missed it completely, but Derek saw it now. Timing, angles, spatial awareness. The foundations real fighters developed after years of disciplined repetition. His expression darkened slightly. Emily noticed it immediately. Derek Lawson was no longer entertaining himself. He was calculating. One of the younger students whispered quietly near the wall, "Why does she look so relaxed?" Nobody answered, because nobody knew. Tyler suddenly stepped directly in front of Claire again, trying to recover control of the situation. "You think you are impressive because you can walk in circles?" he asked. Claire looked at him steadily. "No." Tyler spread his arms dramatically toward the room. "Then what exactly are you trying to prove?" For the first time all evening, Claire's expression changed. Not anger, not arrogance, just disappointment. "Nothing," she said softly. "You are the ones trying to prove something." The words landed harder than anyone expected. Several students looked away uncomfortably. Derek's jaw tightened. He recognized the danger immediately. Humiliation worked only when the target accepted weakness. Claire Bennett refused to play that role, and the longer she stayed calm, the more foolish everyone else in the dojo began to look. Tyler stepped forward again, irritation finally overpowering performance. "You know what?" he snapped. "Let us see how calm you stay when this gets harder." Derek did not stop him. That was the moment Emily Carter felt the room truly change, not because tension was rising, but because Derek Lawson, a man obsessed with control, had just allowed his own ego to take over the lesson. Tyler Reed rolled his shoulders and stepped farther into the center of the mat, his irritation now obvious to everyone watching. The atmosphere inside the dojo had changed from amusement into something tighter, heavier, harder to control. Even the students holding phones near the walls had stopped whispering. They were no longer waiting for Claire Bennett to embarrass herself. They were waiting to understand why she had not already done it. Derek Lawson sensed the shift too, and it bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Control inside his dojo depended on certainty. His students needed to believe he could instantly identify strength and weakness in any room. But the quiet woman standing under the fluorescent lights had disrupted that certainty without making a single aggressive move. Rainwater streamed down the tall windows behind the class, while thunder rumbled faintly overhead. Claire stood calmly at the center of the circle white practice belt tied neatly at her waist, her breathing slow and controlled. Tyler pointed toward her with an irritated laugh. "You keep acting like you know something we do not," he said. "So what exactly are you?" Claire looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Someone trying to avoid unnecessary problems." Several students exchanged confused glances. Tyler scoffed loudly. "That sounds like fear to me." Claire shook her head once. "No, experience." The room fell quiet again. Derek stepped forward immediately, trying to reclaim control before the tension slipped further away from him. "Enough philosophy," he said sharply. "This is a dojo, not a therapy session." Nervous laughter scattered around the room. Derek pointed toward the edge of the mat. "Remove the sneakers." Claire looked down briefly, then nodded. She stepped calmly toward the bench near the wall and sat down without rushing. Every eye in the dojo followed her movements now. Slowly, she untied her worn white running shoes and placed them neatly beside her folded hoodie. Then she reached toward her left wrist and paused. A slim silver watch rested beneath her sleeve. For the first time all evening, Claire's expression shifted slightly. Not fear, not hesitation, something quieter, almost reflective. She removed the watch carefully and set it beside the shoes. Emily Carter noticed it immediately. The entire dojo noticed it. The room had become so silent that the faint ticking of rain against the windows suddenly sounded loud. Claire stood again and stepped back onto the mat barefoot. Her posture looked different now. Subtle, difficult to explain, but different, more balanced, more grounded. Tyler tried forcing another laugh, though it sounded thinner than before. What, things getting serious now? Claire adjusted the white practice belt once. For you, maybe. Several students froze. Derek's eyes narrowed instantly. Claire had not raised her voice. She had not threatened anyone, but somehow the sentence landed harder than shouting would have. Emily felt goosebumps rise along her arms. Tyler stepped closer again, but this time he stopped half a step farther away than before. Even he did not fully realize he had done it. Claire noticed. Derek noticed too. That tiny subconscious hesitation irritated him immediately. You wanted pressure, Derek said coldly. Fine. He pointed toward Tyler and the two senior black belts beside him, 3-on-1 movement drill. Several students inhaled sharply. Emily looked toward Derek in disbelief. Sensei, she said carefully, maybe that is enough for a first class. Derek never looked at her. Do you question my instruction? Emily lowered her eyes immediately. Tyler grinned again, encouraged by Derek's approval, but the confidence behind it looked forced now. Claire glanced briefly toward Emily. For the first time all evening, her expression softened slightly. Gratitude. Then it disappeared. She turned back toward the 3 black belts surrounding her beneath the harsh white lights. The room felt smaller now. Hotter. The air heavy with ego, tension, and a mistake still unfolding in slow motion. Claire inhaled once, calm and measured, while the students around the dojo unknowingly prepared themselves to witness something none of them would forget. The tension inside the dojo thickened until even the sound of rain outside seemed distant. 3 black belts now stood around Claire Bennett beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, while dozens of students watched without speaking. Some folded their arms tightly. Others lowered their phones slightly, sensing the atmosphere no longer felt playful. Derek Lawson remained near the edge of the mat with the rigid posture of a man refusing to admit uncertainty. But uncertainty had already entered the room. Tyler Reed bounced lightly on the balls of his feet, trying to project confidence toward the watching students. Just movement, he announced loudly. Do not panic. Claire looked at him calmly. I am not the one panicking. A few students exchanged nervous glances. Tyler's jaw tightened. Derek immediately clapped once. Begin. The 3 black belts started moving around Claire in slow, coordinated circles, attempting to tighten angles and limit her movement space. It was supposed to look overwhelming, intimidating, but Claire's expression never changed. She shifted quietly across the mat with smooth, economical steps that wasted almost no energy at all. One student near the wall whispered softly, "Why does she move like that?" Emily Carter already knew the answer, even if she could not fully explain it yet. Claire was not reacting, she was anticipating. Every time one of the black belts adjusted position, Claire had already moved before the pressure fully formed. No sudden motions, no panic, just timing. Derek's eyes narrowed further. Years of experience told him something important now. Claire Bennett had trained seriously somewhere, very seriously. Tyler stepped forward suddenly, attempting to close distance faster. Claire pivoted smoothly sideways before he fully blocked her path. Tyler stumbled half a step past her and quickly regained balance while a few students looked at one another in confusion. Claire had barely moved. Tyler forced a laugh. Lucky angle. Claire said nothing. Another black belt approached from behind while the 3rd shifted from the left. Claire rotated between them with calm precision, never trapped, never rushed. The students around the room had stopped smiling completely now. The exercise no longer resembled a beginner struggling under pressure. It looked like experienced fighters chasing someone they could not quite contain. Derek crossed his arms tighter. Increase pressure, he ordered coldly. Tyler obeyed immediately. The pace quickened. Sneakers squeaked faintly near the walls as students unconsciously stepped backward to create more space around the mat. Claire inhaled slowly once, then everything changed. Tyler moved first, trying to cut off her angle. Claire shifted lightly past him with a motion so efficient, several students barely understood what they had just seen. Tyler lost positioning instantly and turned too late. One of the other black belts collided awkwardly into his shoulder while trying to recover spacing. Gasps spread quietly through the dojo. Claire remained balanced at the center, while the three men scrambled to reorganize themselves around her. Derek's face darkened immediately. Emily felt her heartbeat quicken. Nobody in the room had expected this. Tyler looked embarrassed now, no longer amused. He rushed forward again, more aggressively this time, trying to regain control of the moment in front of the watching students. Claire stepped aside calmly and redirected his momentum with a simple movement of her shoulder and arm. Tyler stumbled backward several feet before catching himself near the edge of the mat. Silence crashed across the dojo. Complete silence. No laughter. No whispers. Even the rain outside suddenly sounded louder. Tyler stared at Claire in disbelief while the two senior black belts hesitated for the first time all evening. Claire lowered her hands slowly. Her breathing remained perfectly steady, not even slightly winded. Derek Lawson felt something cold settle into his stomach as realization finally began creeping through the room. The quiet woman they had mocked since the moment she walked through the door was not surviving their pressure. She was controlling it. The dojo remained frozen in stunned silence as Tyler Reed regained his footing near the edge of the mat. His face burned red beneath the fluorescent lights, not from pain but from humiliation. Around him, students stared openly now, struggling to process what they had just witnessed. Claire Bennett had not overpowered anyone. She had not raised her voice. She had barely even moved. Yet somehow 3 experienced black belts looked completely outmatched by a quiet woman wearing a borrowed white belt. Rain hammered steadily against the windows while thunder rolled low above the city. Derek Lawson stepped forward slowly, his expression colder than before. The confidence he had displayed earlier was gone now, replaced by something more dangerous. Pride under pressure. Again, Derek ordered sharply. Tyler looked toward him immediately, grateful for the chance to recover control of the room. The 2 other black belts repositioned themselves around Claire with far more caution this time. Nobody was laughing anymore. Claire stood calmly at the center of the mat, shoulders relaxed, breathing steady. Emily Carter noticed the smallest detail then. Claire's eyes never locked onto one person for too long. They moved constantly, reading the room, tracking balance, spacing, timing, like someone who had spent years inside high-pressure situations where hesitation carried consequences. Derek pointed toward the group. "Close the gaps," he instructed. "Do not chase her movement. Cut it off." The black belts obeyed immediately, forming a tighter formation around Claire while students leaned forward silently near the walls. Tyler moved first again, this time more controlled, trying to force Claire toward the others. One black belt shifted behind her while another angled toward her right side. For a brief second, it looked like the trap might finally close. Then Claire moved. Calm, precise. She pivoted smoothly through the smallest opening before the formation sealed completely, guiding Tyler harmlessly past her position with minimal contact. His momentum carried him directly into the path of the second black belt, forcing both men to stumble awkwardly sideways across the mat. Gasps spread across the room. Claire remained standing exactly where the opening had appeared, balanced and composed as if she had predicted the movement several seconds earlier. Tyler stared at her in disbelief. "How are you doing that?" he demanded. Claire looked at him quietly. "You keep showing me your next move before you make it." Nobody spoke after that. Derek's jaw tightened visibly. Several students lowered their phones completely now, no longer recording for entertainment. The atmosphere inside the dojo had transformed into something almost uncomfortable. The hierarchy everyone trusted was cracking in real time. One of the younger students whispered near the wall, "She is teaching them." Emily glanced toward Derek immediately. He heard it too, and he hated it. Derek stepped closer onto the mat himself now, the polished floor creaking faintly beneath his bare feet. "Enough games," he said coldly. His voice echoed through the silent room. Claire turned toward him calmly. Derek studied her carefully for several seconds before speaking again. "Who trained you?" Claire held his gaze without arrogance. "People who cared more about discipline than ego." The sentence landed like a slap across the room. Tyler looked down immediately. One of the black belts shifted uncomfortably near the wall. Derek's face hardened. He had spent years building authority inside this dojo through intimidation, pressure, and public control. But Claire Bennett had dismantled that authority simply by refusing to lose composure. Derek pointed toward the center of the mat one final time. "One round," he said quietly. "No demonstrations, no movement drills, just controlled sparring." Emily's eyes widened instantly. Several students looked nervous now. Derek was no longer protecting the atmosphere of the dojo. He was trying to protect his pride. Claire remained still for a moment before answering softly. "You really should let this go." Derek's expression darkened. "Why?" Claire glanced around the silent room filled with watching students. "Because this stopped being about training a long time ago." The room went completely still again, and deep down, every single person inside the dojo knew she was right. For several long seconds, nobody inside Lawson Martial Arts Academy moved at all. The rain outside continued pouring against the glass windows, while the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. But inside the dojo, the silence felt heavy enough to stop the entire room from breathing. Derek Lawson stood rigid near the center of the mat, staring at Claire Bennett with the expression of a man realizing control had slipped from his hands long before he noticed it happening. Tyler Reed slowly backed away toward the wall, no longer trying to hide the frustration and embarrassment written across his face. Around the room, students exchanged uncertain looks with one another. The hierarchy they trusted suddenly looked fragile. Claire bent down calmly and reached for her folded hoodie near the bench. "We are done here," she said quietly. Derek's pride flared instantly. "No," he snapped, "we are not." Claire paused but did not look at him. Derek stepped forward again, his voice echoing sharply across the dojo. "You walk in here acting mysterious, embarrassing my students, undermining my instruction, and now you think you can just leave?" Claire slowly straightened. Her eyes met his without anger. "I did not embarrass your students," she answered softly. "You did." The room went dead silent. Tyler looked away immediately. Several black belts near the wall lowered their heads slightly, unable to deny the truth hanging in the air between them. Derek's face reddened beneath the fluorescent lights. For years, nobody inside his dojo had challenged him publicly. Certainly not with calmness. Calmness made arrogance look loud. Emily Carter watched Claire carefully now, realizing something else. Claire never once tried to dominate the room. She never demanded respect. She simply carried herself like someone who no longer needed approval from anyone. Derek pointed toward the white belt around Claire's waist. "You expect me to believe someone with your skill level just walked in off the street?" Claire looked down briefly at the borrowed belt. A faint sadness crossed her face for the first time all evening. "I stopped wearing my real belt a long time ago." The sentence hit the room with quiet force. Emily frowned slightly. "Why?" she asked before stopping herself. Claire glanced toward the young student near the wall. Her expression softened again. "Because belts can become dangerous when people start loving them more than discipline." Nobody spoke after that. Derek's jaw tightened harder. The words felt aimed directly at him, and deep down he knew why. Emily suddenly noticed something half visible near the opening of Claire's backpack resting beside the bench. A small embroidered patch, worn from age, military lettering. Curiosity pulled her closer before she could stop herself. "Wait," Emily whispered softly. She carefully lifted the patch from the edge of the bag while Claire watched silently. The room leaned closer. The patch carried faded gold stitching beneath an eagle insignia and the words "Advanced Tactical Defense Instructor." Emily's eyes widened instantly. "This is military training," she said quietly. One of the older black belts stepped forward in disbelief. That program was elite level. Another student stared at Claire. "How do you have this?" Claire hesitated for several seconds before answering. "I spent 12 years training close protection teams and defensive instructors." Tyler blinked rapidly. "For the military?" Claire nodded once. The room erupted into stunned whispers. Derek's face drained slowly of color as realization finally crashed fully into place. The quiet woman he mocked from the moment she entered the dojo had spent years teaching professionals whose jobs depended on staying calm under pressure. Claire reached gently for the patch and placed it back into her bag. "I did not come here to prove anything," she said. "I moved here 3 months ago. I was simply looking for somewhere peaceful to train again." Nobody in the dojo could meet her eyes anymore. Not Tyler, not the black belts, not even Derek Lawson himself, because the truth had become painfully obvious now. The strongest person in the room had been the quietest one from the very beginning. The silence inside Lawson Martial Arts Academy lingered long after Claire Bennett placed the military patch back into her bag. Nobody knew what to say anymore. The students who had laughed earlier now stood motionless near the walls, avoiding eye contact with one another as the reality of the evening settled heavily across the room. Rain continued streaming down the tall windows, while distant thunder rolled softly beyond the city skyline. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, the dojo suddenly felt smaller than before, stripped of the confidence and noise that had filled it only an hour earlier. Tyler Reed slowly stepped backward until he reached the wall behind him. The arrogance that once shaped every movement he made had completely disappeared. He looked down at the mat with tight shoulders and clenched hands, replaying every smug comment he had thrown toward Claire since she walked through the front door. Across the room, several younger students looked visibly uncomfortable now, embarrassed by how quickly they had followed the crowd. Derek Lawson remained standing near the center of the dojo, but his authority no longer carried the same weight. Claire had exposed something far more damaging than weakness in technique. She had exposed weakness in character. Claire calmly slipped her watch back onto her wrist and picked up her folded hoodie from the bench. Her movements remained quiet and unhurried, as though the entire evening had simply exhausted her rather than satisfied her. Emily Carter stepped forward carefully. "Wait," she said softly. Claire looked toward her. Emily hesitated before speaking again. "Why did you not say who you were from the beginning?" The room listened closely. Claire considered the question for several seconds before answering. "Because people who truly understand discipline should not need credentials to show basic respect." Nobody moved after that. The sentence settled over the dojo like a final lesson nobody had expected to receive. Derek lowered his eyes briefly for the first time all evening. He remembered every dismissive glance, every sarcastic remark, every moment he encouraged the humiliation because he believed appearance told him everything he needed to know about a person. But Claire Bennett had dismantled that belief without insults, without anger, and without ever trying to embarrass anyone in return. That was the part that hurt the most. Tyler finally forced himself to speak. "I am sorry," he muttered quietly. Claire looked at him calmly. "You were trying to impress people," she said. "That usually leads to poor decisions." Tyler swallowed hard and nodded silently. One by one, several students lowered their heads in quiet embarrassment. The atmosphere inside the dojo no longer felt tense. It felt reflective, honest. Claire slipped her backpack over one shoulder and turned toward the exit. As she walked across the polished floor, the students instinctively moved aside to clear a path for her, not out of fear, out of respect. Derek watched her reach the doorway before finally speaking. "Claire." She paused near the entrance while rainwater shimmered against the glass behind her. Derek's voice sounded different now. Smaller. "You were right," he admitted quietly. "This stopped being about training." Claire studied him for a moment before giving a small nod. "A dojo should build humility," she said softly, "not ego." Then she opened the door and stepped out into the rain without another word. The cold night air swept briefly through the entrance before the door closed behind her. Nobody inside the dojo spoke for several long seconds afterward. The students simply stood there beneath the bright fluorescent lights, surrounded by silence and the uncomfortable weight of self-reflection. Because that night, every person inside Lawson Martial Arts Academy learned something far more important than how to fight. They learned how quickly arrogance can blind people to real strength, and they learned that true discipline rarely arrives loudly. Sometimes it walks quietly through the front door wearing old sneakers, carrying no trophies, asking only for respect.